So as part of the transportation planning effort, we want to walk through the basics of transportation so we're all on the same page. So the first piece of transportation that we all need to understand is the role of infrastructure and the role of roads and the role of public infrastructure. The streets are permanent. Streets are the bone structure of the community. And why is this? What doesn't change in the community? It's the street network. And it's largely because of the underground infrastructure and the town's municipal services and how we provide services to the community. And that really is conveyed through the streets. So when you look at a community, you need to look at the bone structure of the community. And we can tell a lot about the bone structures of the community. Looking at this animal, we've never seen it alive, but we knew it was a meat eater by its jaws. We knew it stood upright and walked, and its tail was used as ballast, yet we've never seen this animal alive. You can tell a lot of anything by looking at their bone structure. So you can do the same with cities. So looking at the screen on the left is Savannah, Georgia. On the right is Irvine, California. This is simply looking at the streets and public spaces and nothing else. And you can tell a lot from the community when you're looking at the street network. Savannah on the left, looking at the street network, you can circle this building and ask yourself, what land uses have succeeded in that building? And that building has reinvented itself several times since Oglethorpe designed the community. It has been a residence, it has been retail, it has been office. It has reinvented itself over time, and it's allowed to do so because of the bone structure of the community. The street network allows those of a wide variety of land uses to succeed over time. When you look at Irvine, California, you circle this house at the end of the cul-de-sac and you say, what land use can work there? Only residential, nothing else can work. You can't do higher density residential. The parcel and the streets don't serve that. You can't use retail. There's not enough drive-by traffic. It is forever a single family residential unit. And as the community ages, there's lots of questions that Irvine will do to make that effectively understand what works at that location. So street network matters. After the role of infrastructure, let's get to the basics, the trip purpose and patterns of travel, and how do they influence our community. Trip purpose is, why are people in the car, or why are they making their trip? The most dominant trip is obviously personal, recreational, and family related trips, but they don't occur at one moment in time. The one transportation planners care most about is the work trip. It's about 18% of all trips made in a community. It's your commute. And why that matters the most is that happens in a single time frame. Typically 8 to 9, 7 to 9 in the morning, and 4 to 6 in the afternoon. The highest concentration of travel at any one moment is related to the work trip. And you look at the distances people go, 80% of all trips other than the work trip, the New York Times coined as Aaronsville. 70% of all trips households make occur within 3 miles of a house. Now, this is national. Crested Butte is very different. 3 miles is a very walkable and bikeable distance. I walk down the hill from Mount Crested Butte 3 miles. But if you apply that distance to Crested Butte, they're much smaller in terms of Aaronsville. So suddenly walking and biking becomes a very important mode split in the town of Crested Butte. And you saw on the data maps that 80% of all trips with an origin or destination in Crested Butte come on bike or foot. What do the patterns mean? Local traffic versus regional traffic, right? Those are the two patterns that we need to worry about. Local traffic needs, land use context is very important. Where are you traveling to? Or am I going to a friend's house? Am I going to a park? Am I going to a grocery store? Land use context matters and how you travel because you're passing through your neighbor's neighborhood. Lower travel speeds work because they're shorter trips. Open access because you want access to the business, the local businesses and the homes want driveways on the street. They need access to the road. Good connectivity matters. Going to a park, to a trailhead, to a grocery store, to CB Nordic is very different. There's different routes, and having multiple routes is very important for the local trip. And most importantly, walking, bicycling, and transit are all viable transportation alternatives to the trip, and the pattern of the trip. Is it local? going to regional trips or through trips, 37% of all trips in the summertime pass through Crested Butte, 44 in the winter pass through Crested Butte. Land use is less important, right? I'm making a longer trip. Say I'm going from Gunnison to CBMR. I am not necessarily interested in the land uses in between. Higher travel speeds, and you see that with CDOT, they want higher travel speeds on 135. Controlled access, they want to limit the number of driveways or intersection spacings so we can get higher capacity and efficiency on the road. They want limited connectivity, right? Less roads to connect, safety risks for that longer trip. It's really important to note walking and bicycling really aren't traffic alternatives or transportation alternatives. Traveling from Gunnison to say CBMR, transit can be a viable partner, and RTA certainly works that way. But regional through trips and local trips are very different, and we need to understand that how it works and impacts Crested Butte streets. Now let's go into the meat of the conversation, is really how does traffic and land use work together? And it's really important to understand. So historically, transportation engineers and transportation planners were asked or even told politically from the 40s until the 90s to move more cars as if nothing else matters. And how do you do that if you move more cars? Well, it's more pavement, that is a wider road, more network, more street alternatives, but putting more pavement into the road will certainly move more cars. More efficiency, system management. What is system management? That's one-way streets, it's roundabouts, it's things that squeeze more capacity out of the existing infrastructure that you have. ITS is intelligent transportation systems. Can we time the signals? How do we squeeze more cars out of the existing infrastructure? So those are really the only two ways to move more cars, is through more pavement or more efficiency. But however, that changed in the 90s. Or before we talk about how that changed, let's look at the consequences of that thinking. So when we size roads, transportation planners and engineers, yellow is the forecast. How many people are going to be on the road? We use population and employment forecast to size the road. And that road is shown in purple, right? We change a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. You're adding capacity and you're widening the road from 2 to 4. And so hopefully transportation planners will size a road to match the forecast. And that's how we do that. We do population forecast to size road. We use a transportation demand model, say this is where we anticipate trips to go. What happens when we build the road? Well, when we build the road, there's a phenomenon called induced travel and induced traffic. That is your willingness to go 5 miles further to save 10 cents on toilet paper. Everyone does that. If you can travel further, you might sell your home and move your home further out, or you might be willing to go to a grocery store further away simply because you can save money on it. And the roadway network suddenly subsidizes Walmart, right? Or Home Depot. Instead of the mom and pop or Ace Hardware store, you'll travel further to save 5 cents on a roll of toilet paper to go to Walmart. So our transportation system has subsidized big box because they're making you go to them instead of them coming to you. Traditionally, mom and pop retailers are small, they're in your store, they serve a local need, but they can't compete with the larger big boxes. And what we've done with our transportation system is subsidize them by making larger roads. So what happens when you size the road and induce travel influences, we never seem to keep up with the traffic. So where at 2-lane streets, we have the capacity to provide choice. A 2-lane street, you can walk along, you can bike along, transit certainly works. As the road gets bigger, we're starting to limit opportunities, right? We increase the size of the road to 4 lanes. Suddenly it's less desirable to walk, less desirable to bike. And because you can't walk, transit becomes less desirable. As the road continues to grow, we're limiting our transportation options and network. So induced travel has shown moving cars as if nothing else matters hasn't worked particularly well in our community. And here's a way to illustrate it. It's called the chain of impacts. First order, we widen the road, right? That's what we choose to do. And there's good reasons to do that, right? When you widen the road, you reduce delay and you increase costs. And when those are all good things, right? thank you. You've shortened my commute. You've reduced the time and the costs of travel by doing that. So first order, that's why we do that. Transportation engineers do that because politically, that's a very sexy thing to do or good thing to do is reduce cost and reduce delay. But when you do that, what are the second and third order of impacts associated with widening the road and reducing delay? Well, if we reduce delay, people will decide to range further. We just went over this. They'll go 5 miles further to save 10 cents on toilet paper. They may choose to move further out. There's a house further out in the countryside. I can move further. I'll end up driving more. I tend to own more cars when they make those decisions. And what is the third order of impact, right? When the homes move, jobs tend to follow the homes. There's community disinvestment. Instead of a mom and pop, you have big box. We have an inactivity epidemic. One of the contributing factors to obesity is inactivity. And when you create a transportation system that is dependent on the car, you're not walking, you're not biking, you're inactive, and suddenly we're starting health costs on our community. We're increasing energy demand because we're driving more. We're increasing our carbon footprint because we're driving more, we own more cars. So what looked at first like a really good idea, widen road to reduce cost and reduce delay, what we're seeing historically is really a change in pattern. And the question is second and third order impacts on Crested Butte. So as you look at transportation, there's consequences to our actions beyond the immediate first order of impact. An alternative way, and what transportation engineers started doing in the 90s, is looking at alternative ways to move people, right? Of course, we're still moving cars. Cars is the dominant mode of travel. We're still doing that, but added to the portfolio of tools, you think of arrows in your quiver. One arrow is, aren't we really moving people, not cars? Isn't that our priority? And certainly you've seen since the 90s, even in Crested Butte, an emphasis on transit. You saw Mountain Express, RTA, sort of be born and improve in this time frame, improving walking, improving biking. Micromobility is electric scooters and HOV. So we're seeing transportation engineers being asked to do weird things from their perspective is instead of just going for car, aren't we also moving people and improving transit, improving bicycling? Of course we are. How about improve the quality of the trip? We hear all over Crested Butte concerns for speeding. So we hear traffic calming. What are you doing to slow traffic down? A lot of communities want beautiful streetscapes. What are we going to do with Elk Avenue? From a business perspective, those are things really foreign to traffic engineers. It's like, wait a minute, streetscape, context sensitive design, the view from the road. Those are things that engineers never did in the past. And now obviously it's something we do every day is think of the quality of the trip, think of traffic calming as we design roads. How about a really odd concept of move less people, fewer miles? It's probably the most powerful thing that is code for land use, right? Through land use decisions and where we build our affordable housing, we can really minimize impacts on the transportation network, put people closer to their jobs so they don't have to drive, right? Creating mixed use environments so they can walk to shopping, improve the roadway network and connectivity. Those are all land use decisions. Those aren't transportation decisions. Creating transit supportive communities or what we call pedestrian oriented environments, compact development, looking at density, all the trips that people make suddenly with higher density environments, they can do it on foot because there's enough disposable income from rooftops that you can support stores and then you can walk and bike to stores. And then lastly, it's really important to understand is you're trying to, in a transportation planning is manage, not solve. No one has solved congestion, traffic to date. They haven't said, aha, we're done. Communities continue to grow, but from a transportation perspective, you can choose to set policy to really influence how people move through a town. You can set lane limits, right? The state of Florida maxed out the state arterial system at 6 lanes. You cannot build a 6-lane highway in Florida anymore because they know it's fruitless from an alternative transportation mode. You can change the levels of service standards. So traffic engineers grade roads from A to F. And a lot of times you'll hear level of service C, level service D is the minimum or the maximum extent will allow a road to, and they'll use their terms, degrade, right? But with a stroke of a pen, council could say, well, instead of a level of service D, we can change that to level of service E. And when you change it to E, you've just added 20% capacity to the road without changing the pavement. It's really important to note when you look at standards is roads don't break, right? Bridges fall down, trees fall down, roads do not break. So what happens in congestion? People change behavior. Roads don't break. So people, if it's congested, might choose to take a different mode of travel instead of a car. They may walk, bike, or take transit. They may choose to take a different route, right? They may do a different route altogether with congestion. So roads don't break. People are decision makers and they consciously understand they may choose to travel at a different time of day. And it's really important. That is an important policy decision that council would make on the transportation system. So when you look at the transportation system holistically, looking at moving cars, moving people, looking at the quality of the trip, manage and not solve for congestion, there's a lot of different ways of looking at streets that help you do that, right? This is a graphic from the Highway Capacity Manual. It's the Bible of traffic engineers. And what it tells you is the most efficient road you can design is really between 25 and 30 miles an hour. And what that is that's the gap between motorists, right? You as a motorist have a natural gap to the car in front of you. And traffic engineers know that, and that gap changes based on speed. Typically, the faster the speed, the bigger the gap. And you're not processing enough cars because the gap is too large. If the cars are at congestion at a standstill or the gap is too small, you're not processing enough cars. The most efficient transportation system you can design is really at 25 to 30 miles an hour. And that's the distance between you and the car in front of you and processing the number of cars per hour. That is very important. Now, 25 and 30 miles an hour is a very pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly and transit friendly speed. So at those speeds, it's comfortable to bike or walk next to these roads. It's comfortable from a land use perspective to have your home or a business next to a 25-mile-an-hour road. It works. As you go faster, you're not processing enough cars, but you're also limiting your ability to walk, bike because the roads are too fast, or you're limiting your land use choices because no one wants to live on that fast of a road. And so that's really important to understand your highway capacity and the speed flow relationship. Next is lane capacity. How many cars? What is the right size for a road? And what you're looking at from left to right is the size of the road. A 2-lane road without a left turn lane processes about 600 cars per hour per lane. If you go to a 3-lane road like 135 in Crested Butte, where you have the left turn lane at the 4-way, what that allows is you to process up to 900 cars per hour per lane. As you get larger, you're getting less efficient. So you're going from a 3-lane road with left turn lane to a 4-lane road or a 5-lane road, and you're suddenly losing efficiency, not capacity. So a 4-lane road processes about 500 cars per hour per lane. A 4-lane road obviously has 2 lanes in each direction. So you're doing 1,000 for 2 lanes, where a 3-lane is only doing 900. So it's carrying more cars, it's just less efficient. And so it's very important. Efficiency matters because what do we want to put into our roads and how you design a road. So the most efficient road you can design is a 2-lane road with a left turn lane. And so when you have 2-lane streets, they actually carry more cars than a 4-lane street. That's what the previous graphic shows. So the same total number of lane miles, but you can put more cars on a 2-lane street than you can efficiently per lane on a 4-lane street. Why is that? Well, naturally on multi-lane roads, people shy away from the outside lane, the right turn lane, because people are slowing down, getting in and out of driveways. It's less efficient. But the real reason is the left-hand turn. Just on a sidebar, we could solve world hunger if no one made a left, right? Left-hand turns are the bane of traffic engineers. And when someone's making a left on a larger road, we have a thing called a protected green arrow. It allows the left hand to go as if no one else matters. And it's a safety purpose because you can't safely make a left on a multi-lane road. And that robs the street of green time. And green time is throughput. On a 3-lane road, you don't need a protected left turn arrow. The through traffic can go through. And that's really the fundamental reason why roads become less efficient, is because it's a safety concern for the left-hand turn. If everyone made a right-hand turn, and UPS does it, UPS drivers are not allowed to make left-hand turns. They make right-hand turns in city centers because it's more efficient. And it's very interesting because what that has taught us is, with a network of streets like what Crested Butte has, is you have actually more capacity in a two-lane roads than you do in a single 4-lane arterial. And so it's very important to think through. What does network mean? And this is a typo. This is not a typo, actually. No network means big roads. So you think out near Skyland, if you think about near Buckhorn, and in many cases, Mount Crested Butte, right? Andreas Dwani is an architect out of Miami, Florida, and he made this very famous diagram, and it shows a mall, it shows apartments, it shows single-family homes, and it shows a school. These are all land uses and how they're allocated. Not one of those land uses connect. A lot of people don't want connected streets, right? Because it'll add trips to the neighborhoods. So when you don't connect your streets, what you're doing is, my boss, Walter Kulash, he worked very closely with Andreas, and he did a very exciting graphic for traffic engineers. It's called trip assignment. And he assigned the trips. So the home-based school trip or the home-based shopping trip, shown in red. Every last trip has to use the arterial road. There is no local network. And while it's nice to live on those streets, it creates an unbelievable burden on the arterials. And so when you have no network, you have big roads, and there's consequences. So what happens on those big roads is you don't feel comfortable walking, you don't feel comfortable biking, and you don't feel comfortable. Because of that, transit will not succeed. Transit needs walking and biking to succeed. And so no network, bigger roads. Alternatively, is have network, have what Crested Butte has, right? This is the same land use. It's, here's the mall and the retail, here's apartments, here's the residential homes, here's the school. It's the same exact number of, or density of land uses. They're arranged differently, and they're connected through streets. A lot of people, you're connecting streets. Yes, we are. And what that does, if you put the trip assignment on it, you can see the home-based shopping trip, you can see the home-based school trip, your home-based work trip. All the trips have choices. They can get on the arterial, or they can use the local street network. They have that choice. So the locals can avoid the arterial, and therefore the arterial does not need to be as large. And with a smaller arterial roadway, suddenly walking, biking, and transit become viable partners. So how you arrange land uses and how you create street network is really critically important to the success of any community. And so what happens when you look at a holistic way of looking at transportation? It may look bad at first, accepting congestion, right? At first look, wow, if you accept congestion and choose transit, biking, and other alternatives, it's going to increase delay and increase costs. That's bad, right? That's what we've been told over years. That's bad. But if you look further than that, instead of moving your home because the cost of transportation is so much, maybe you'll stay home and reinvest in your neighborhood. Maybe you'll choose to walk, bike, or use transit instead of a car. You'll certainly drive less, and you'll own fewer cars. So what does that mean to our community? Well, that means if the homes stay and are improved, jobs stay, right? We see community reinvestment. We see Main Street retail instead of big box. You see improved public health because people are walking and biking, less vehicle miles of travel, reduced energy demand, lower carbon footprints. These are all positive. So what appears to be at first a bad idea because we're increasing costs or increasing delay, in fact, in the long term, take the long view to any transportation issue. In fact, these may be better. And you ask yourself, what are Crested Butte's success measures? What do we care about? This is what we want you to think about and the decisions we all have doing the transportation plan. So let's move out of that sort of very important traffic and land use relationship and shift to safety, because this is really why transportation engineers look and redesign roads. This is first and foremost. Capacity is second. The number one concern is safety. Well, if that's the case, let's understand safety. and the role of speed, basic physics and sightlines. These are diagrams that show at certain speeds, what's the consequence of a vehicle, a 2,000 and 3,000 pound vehicle hitting a 160-pound person or a 140-pound person. We know if a car goes speeding into 100 people at 15 miles an hour, we're only going to kill 3.5 people, 4 people. That's good, right? That's really kind of a phenomenally amazing statistic. If you hit those same 100 people at 100 miles an hour, you're going to kill 83 of them. Speed matters. It's basic physics. And the most important factor in safety is speed, right? It's not conflict. It's not sight lines. It's speed. Speed has the most consequence. So what is it about speed that makes it safe or unsafe for pedestrians besides physics? It's called sight lines. And so the diagram on the right shows you what the motorist sees at different speeds, right? As you're going faster, you start to get tunnel vision because you know the speed and what you can see. And at 30 miles an hour, you may not actually see the same things you see at 15 miles an hour. And that's a fact, right? So at 30 miles an hour, you're not going to see the pedestrians on the street or the bicyclists in the crosswalk. At 15 miles an hour, you're going to see them. And if you're going to see them, you're going to avoid them and you can anticipate them there. But it's not just about anticipation and seeing, it's actually braking, and I'm missing a diagram. The diagram here is braking sight lines and braking distances. Braking distances aren't linear, they're exponential. In other words, if you're going 10 miles an hour and your stopping distance is a certain length, if you twice that speed to 20 miles an hour, you're not doubling the braking distance, you're tripling it. It's an exponential relationship. So there's huge consequences to speed. To slow the mass of the vehicle down is not a linear relationship, it's exponential. So what does that mean to the community's design? If we design a road and we have it posted at 15 miles an hour, right? We have a design speed of 30 miles an hour. We know as engineers, 15% of the population will exceed that number. And that's why we have the 85th percentile. Typically they're male, typically they're influenced by hormones. But if you're speeding at 30 miles an hour, you're really speeding up to 35 and 40 miles an hour. And that's bad. And that's bad for a pedestrian, but it's not dire. And the severity of the crash is very different. So what engineers have done historically is they've flattened the curve of the road. They've straightened out the curves of the road, the horizontal curves and the vertical curves. And when they do that, they can see an obstacle downstream quicker, right? So if there's a driveway hidden behind a curve of a road, either a hill or a curve, that is unsafe because a motorist can't see it. So the historic traffic engineering strategy was to straighten the road out, improve sight lines so I can see that driveway. The unintended consequences, that speeds the road up. The design speed goes up because I can see further. And so you're going 30 miles an hour, we flatten the curve, it raises the design speed to 40 miles an hour. And there's a consequence to that. And that consequence is nearly fatal. The severity of the crash goes way up because we know 15% of the population is still speeding, but now they're doing it at 50 miles an hour instead of 30 miles an hour. Huge consequences. And so what we've learned is designing this way, creating flatter roads, straighter roads, works really, really well for the interstate system. The interstate system in the United States is the safest roadway system in the world, because better than Europe, better than anything, because we have engineered for speed, and there's cushions, there's shoulders, there's braking distances, there's something you can do at those speeds. But the highway design does not work in cities. Our cities are the most unsafe roads in the world, unlike Europe. And so alternatively, instead of flattening the road and making the road faster to make it safer, traffic calm. So if there's a driveway hidden behind a hill, slow the car down so it can go over the hill slowly in anticipation of that driveway. So they're going at speeds that they can react to the hidden driveway. And it's called traffic calming. And I actually worked for the man who coined the phrase traffic calming back in the 90s. And I worked with him for 23 years. And we learned a lot on how to engineer slower streets and safer streets. And there's ways to do that. And this is why we put flower boxes on Sopris, Maroon, and White Rock. We narrowed the street through the flower boxes. We deflected the vehicle's path. If you notice on White Rock, we created chicanes. So the motorists would avoid the flower boxes and deflected their path so they're not going straight. They have to curve through and maybe yield the traffic. And what we saw is a 3 mile an hour decrease in speeds on White Rock. That's pretty good for a 15 mile an hour street to decrease speeds by 3 miles an hour. That's pretty sound engineering. So the flower boxes are doing their job to slow things down, because when people are slower, they see things and they can react. And the consequences of their reactions are not fatal. They're better. And that's why traffic calming is so important. And traffic calming is a part of the nomenclature now since the 90s in roadway safety, right? We know how to design safer streets, either by speeding them up or creating better cushions and sight lines on the interstate system, or slowing them down in our communities. And that's the phenomenon called traffic calming. Let's talk about walking in transit. Why do people drive? And this is an editorial that was given to me from a livable transportation advocate, and it's a transit pill. The patient is the U.S. with a rash of cars, and the doctor is trying to prescribe a transit pill. And the patient says, "Transit pill, no thanks. I'll just live with cars a little while longer." Why is that? Why is the public so adverse to transit, right? It's because we have failed from a land use and transportation planning. We have created an environment people can't conceive of walking in a safe way, so they would take the bus. They can't conceive of those conveniences because we have failed from a land use perspective. So it's both the traffic engineers and land use planners are both to blame. I would say land use planners are more to blame for the ills of our transportation system. Why is that? Right? We don't understand basic phenomena of how far people are willing to walk, right? 70% of the American public will walk 500 feet. So Unterman wrote the book, and it's sort of the Bible of pedestrian planning, is accommodating the pedestrian. And he studied how far people are willing to walk. And he studied many different environments. And what he found is 1 in 10 is willing to walk a half a mile. 7 in 10 will walk 500 feet. And that's very important to understand as we design our communities. And so as you look at trip types, so Crested Butte versus, say, Skyland, just as an example of how the homes are arranged. So enable the pedestrians will reduce the number of trips on the road. So ITE, the Institute of Traffic Engineers, know that if we have 3 destinations that are far apart, it's going to generate 6 trips. Right now, the trip is, are they going to be in a car? Are they going to be in a bike? What are their impacts on the road? Well, when those homes are closer together, or the land uses are closer together, it actually reduces the number of trips. So those 3 destinations are very walkable. They may never get in their car because they can walk to the destination or bike to the destination. So simply how you arrange the land uses will dramatically influence how the roadway system works. And here's an example, the walking distance of 500 feet. You know, if you have a big box retail and nothing around it, and say City Market, Walmart down in Gunnison, and you compare that to Main Street in Gunnison, the walking distances are adding trips to the road. So urban form matters. Crested Butte is very walkable. You saw on the boards, we have 80% of all trips in town are on foot or on bike. When you're in a suburban environment, they won't walk that far. They can't walk that far. And so urban form matters. Architecture matters. Beaux-Arts and the design guidelines have done wonderful things for the walking environment when you look at it. So looking at these townhomes, this is Johnson City, Tennessee. We wanted to illustrate a point, the role of architecture has in influencing how people walk or they don't walk. Right? So these are townhomes. Imagine there's a transit stop on the street or a park across the street. Are you willing to walk that out if we arrange the townhomes in this formation? And what they are is there's an interior courtyard and a driveway that I would get off the courtyard and walk around everything. Well, what if we changed the architecture, but not the density? You know, with some good design guidelines, we can put the front doors on the front of buildings. We can require landscaping and fencing. So suddenly, without changing density at all, we simply changed architecture. Suddenly, you can see someone walking to the street in this arrangement of the building. They can walk across the street to the park. If you looked at how this is a car first environment. This is a pedestrian first environment. I didn't change density at all when we created this graphic. We simply showed you how architecture plays into it. Lastly, parking on Transportation 101s. We have to think about parking. Parking has a huge impact on our community, and parking is different depending on where you live, right? It's very different in downtown Denver, Crested Butte, Arvada, Colorado. All three are different. We have to think, where in the policy profile do we in Crested Butte want to decide on our parking? So the first thing you think about is the parking supply itself, right? We have parking standards that are very suburban in Crested Butte, and they don't recognize that they require sharing, right? And so in the bottom part of the diagram, in rural policy, urban at the top, here's the landform of what parking policy does. When you have a suburban environment or high parking regulations, we create a lot of underutilized parking spaces, and we're not maximizing the use of those parking spaces. So here, after 5 is restaurant, office, midday, residential, and when they work. When they're all separate, isolated land uses, we actually need more parking spaces. When we have a mixed use environment in Crested Butte, we can actually lower our parking ratios because we know they're sharing. So think of Clark's and the Majestic, right? Does the Majestic need its own parking, or can it actually share the parking at Clark's? Well, the overlap between a dentist's office, Clark's, Majestic, a deli, everything, a liquor store, the mixture of those land uses allow us to have lower parking ratios. So they did that through a planned unit development, and it works over at Clark's. But throughout town, we have actually higher parking ratios and allow this to happen, and we require this to happen. So we need to re-examine our parking ratios. What about the walking environment, right? We know on Elk and 3rd is the most popular spot to park, and we don't have enough parking in Crested Butte at Elk and 3rd to meet the demand. And we see all those parking spaces taken. So we put in a parking management plan and improve walking environment, because we know just off of Elk and 3rd, we have plenty of parking spaces. And that was what the parking management plan showed. So in higher speed suburban environments, you don't have a good walking environment. And so you need to put a lot of parking near the destination. In quaint small town and urban environments, we don't need all the parking in one spot, because we can extend the reach of the pedestrian. Pedestrians are willing to walk farther than 500 feet in a quality walking environment. So when you look at a mall, we know once inside the mall, you'll walk up to a half a mile. But we also know you won't park further than 500 feet from your destination. So the ring road around every mall is 500 feet in length. Once you get inside the mall, because they know people will not walk further than that through a parking lot. Once you get inside the mall, we know the anchor stores are typically a quarter mile apart. So you go from one anchor back, that's a half a mile. People will walk further in a higher quality environment. So you have to think about that when you think of your parking requirements. What about transit? In urban environments, there's Portland, Oregon on the right. This is a light rail stop, higher density, and you have more frequent transit service. You don't need as much parking. In lower density suburban environments or rural environments where you don't have good transit, you need higher parking ratios because we don't have an alternative to the car. And so how is transit service in Crested Butte? That weighs into how we decide what we do for transit or for parking. Parking management, right? We just installed this last 2 years. Typically in rural environments, you can park anywhere, anytime. In suburban environments as well, we start to put time restrictions on. We had time restrictions in Crested Butte. We just didn't enforce them. So we actually enforced the time limits on Elk. And we said, you can't park there anymore. We saw a number of cars parking 6 and 8 hours a day on Elk Avenue. Once we put our 2-hour limit, that dispersed the parking and suddenly makes parking available. So Elk is actually more available today with enforced time management than what it was with time limits that wasn't enforced, because people will park as close to the building as they want or can. And lastly, we have interstate parking doing our parking contracting right now. Most rural areas have the marshal do it, but it's subject to resources. The parking isn't the most important thing the police can be doing. There's a lot more important things that they need to focus on, and we recognize that. So we created a parking ambassador with Interstate, and there we don't require paid parking, but they are enforcing it. And so it's a more effective way, cost-effective way to manage parking. So when you look holistically at parking, you have to ask yourself, what policy is correct for Crested Butte? What is the amount of parking we're going to require or build? What's the quality of the walking environment? How good is transit? We can improve transit and change the parking requirements. We can enforce different management techniques, and then compliance and enforcement. So between those, think of it as an amplifier on a speaker. To get the best sound, you have to arrange the best policy. So we're going to be doing that as a part of the transportation plan. So with that, that is Transportation 101. And hopefully this has been helpful, because this is certainly how staff and the transportation profession in general in the United States looks at transportation. And we look forward to you working with us on the project. Thank you very much.